Hello friends, today we are going to review narrative writing and the components. We're going to dig a little bit deeper into each component of narrative writing. We have, now like I said in the beginning, it is a review. We have talked about narrative writing before, we've done some narrative writing, and like I've said before in class, that narrative writing seems to come a little bit easier to students instead of having to research and find topics and find facts and things like that. So today we're going to discuss narrative writing a little bit more. So we're going to identify the key elements of narrative writing. That's when you have your characters, your setting, your plot events, time and place transitions, character dialogue, descriptive details, and sensory language. These are all the components that make up narrative writing. And the good news is, after this lesson, you guys are going to be able to put together some narrative writing with all of these key elements in it. So what is narrative writing? Let's review that. Narrative writing is when you're writing to tell a story. You are, you can tell a personal story, you can tell a true story, you can make up a story. Now there are a lot of different components that go with narrative writing, but a lot of times this is where the writer's describing something that's happened to them, or they want to make up a fun thing that could happen to them with some events or sequencing events in the form of a story. And narrative writing is going to tell you who, what, when, where, why. What happened, why it happened, who it happened with, how it happened, things like that. Now we know that in basic narrative writing we have characters, and we also have a setting. And those things are going to make them be some components, important parts of basic narrative writing. Then we have the different parts of the plot mountain. These are going to be the different areas in which your story is going to happen or to be composed and put together. So we have the, so we have the exposition, and that's going to be at the very beginning where you're introducing the characters and the setting. Then the characters are facing some kind of conflict. Either it could be inside them, like a personal conflict, or they're having a conflict with another character. Then the climax is going to be the most exciting part. That's when it gets intense and you learn what's going on. And then the events leading to the end of the story is when you see things start to pan out, as they say, or conflicts start to get resolved. Okay, you can start to see those things coming together. And then at the end, you're going to get the resolution, the end of the story. How's the conflict solved? So we have time and place transitions. Okay, so those are, one second, okay. So those are time and place transitions are where good writers, which is you, are using transitions to move their story along. And these help move time and places in your story. So you have an area that you're wanting to write about or an information that you're wanting to write about, then give some transitions like these that will help you move along in the next place in what you're writing about. So we have time transitions. We have place transitions, but then on this anchor chart we also have some idea transitions and summarizing. Okay, idea is going to take us from one obviously idea to another, and then summarizing the transitions, that's going to tell me the ending of it, what's happening in the ending. Okay, so here we have character dialogue. Now dialogue is when you are talking in your story. It might be you talking, or it might be what the characters are saying. And so when your characters are speaking to one another, that's what brings your story to life. Dialogue can be tricky to use because it requires lots of special punctuations, which is called a quotation mark, or which are called quotation marks. And in this box that I've boxed up, we have verbs. So when you're doing your dialogue, an example could be, the teacher said, let's get ready for recess. We see that a lot in books. Molly said, come over here and get your food. Sam ordered, come to see me right now, or something like that, okay? So those are some examples of some verbs that you could use for your quotation marks. And we're going to look at a few different ways that we can show, not tell. Using our descriptive language and using descriptive details and using sensory language. So this can tell us that Anaya was mad. That's a descriptive. I mean, that's telling us to the point she's mad. But if you look over here and look over at the, if you're looking over at the showing part, Anaya furrowed her eyebrows, narrowed her eyes, and put her hands on her hips. It took all the control she had not to scream. So that's a little bit more descriptive than just Anaya was mad. So it tells, good writers use, they're showing us information and details rather than telling us, so that we can create an image in our head. A lot of times I say that in class, when you're reading something, tell me about the picture that's telling or that's showing you up in your head. That's what our descriptive details are going to be, and that's what we're going to show and don't tell. So these are some examples of ways that you can show and not tell the information or the descriptive details in your story. We've talked about this one right here. This was the one that we just talked about. And then now let's look at similes and metaphors. We've talked about a lot of similes and metaphors in the classroom. Remember, similes is using like or as, and metaphors is not using like or as. It's a comparison of two things. My pillow was like a cloud when I laid down my head, or laid my head down. And a metaphor, the paintbrush was a magic wand in his hand. So it's comparing the paintbrush to a magic wand without using like or as. Now, writing that appeals to the senses, okay? This is also, if you guys recall, in our writing notebooks where we traced our hand and we went and wrote some sensory details in there. That's the same thing as this anchor chart, sensory details. What are some things that you can see in your, the writer can write about things that you can see in your writing? What are some things that you hear? Touch, taste, and smell. Okay, so for instance, this one right here is an example of sight. The muddy socks were piled on top of the rug. So when you read that sentence, or when I read that sentence, I am automatically thinking of a rug on the floor and there's a bunch of muddy socks on it. I can see that pictured in my head. And the sound, the buzzing sound filled the air, okay? Now this is something, as the plane flew over, this is something that I think about a strong sensory detail for myself, because when I'm outside I hear a lot of things that are going on, very sensitive to the sounds around. The mud was gross. The mud felt sticky and cold between my toes. So instead of just saying the mud was gross, you can say the mud felt sticky and cold between my toes. A little bit more of a descriptive detail. Okay, so two different ways to do this, to show and not tell, is descriptive details. These are the words that are painting that picture. When you read the text, you're getting those the picture in your mind about what is happening, and that's because of the vivid adjectives and descriptions that you're giving. And then the sensory language, these are words and phrases that use the five senses to further explain what is happening. So for show, don't tell, you can show being tired by writing, instead of I am tired, you have droopy eyes, yawning. These are some things that you would see, mumbling when talking. That's a sensory detail or sensory language that you could hear. lounging around, body dragging along. All of these things are things that happen when you're tired most of the time. And so you can use these in your writing instead of just saying the boy was tired. So we're going to show, don't tell. Now, explode the moment. This is how good writers are going to tell about the sensory details. So it's almost like it's being described in slow motion. An example right here with the girl and the snowman. Lastly, I put the hat on the snowman's head. He was complete. Okay, so that's an example of a moment that's happening in this narrative writing. Now, if we look at this a little bit further, let's read this. I'm going to read it and you guys read it with me together. That might explode the moment a little bit more. My nose and cheeks were shiny and red. My fingertips and toes were as cold as ice. Here's a simile. Making a snowman was no small feat. Now, feat, this word right here, that's going to mean like no small task or activity that you're doing, especially when making one so grand that it mightily towered over my head. My snowman was almost complete. I needed some help to reach the very top of his soaring head. I pushed over a stool and tightly nestled it into the snow in order to keep it sturdy. I stepped up and carefully placed the top hat on his round head. Now my snowman was complete and just perfect. I had definitely earned myself a delicious warm cup of cocoa. So there's so many different ways in there that they're telling us about descriptive details and sensory language. My fingertips and toes were as cold as ice. So it's almost like when I read this sentence right here, I can feel that. I know how cold ice is. And so I'm thinking as I'm reading that, when I've been outside before in the snow and your fingers and your toes get really, really cold as they would ice. Okay, and so also the next thing could be making a snowman was no small feat, especially when making one so grand that it mightily towered over my head. So think of something towering over your head. It's so big you have to look up at it. And then I stepped up carefully. I'm on this one right here. And placed the top hat on his round head. Now my snowman was complete and just perfect. I had definitely earned myself a delicious, warm cup of hot cocoa. Okay, so those are some descriptive words in there. And again, this is being able to show and don't tell. So Brian was angry. He started to yell. Okay, so that, you're telling what happens, but let's be a little bit more descriptive and give it. Brian pursed his lips and clenched his fists into tight balls. Try as he might, he could not contain himself. Within seconds, he erupted like a volcano. Okay, think of that compared to Brian was angry and he started to yell. And so you can go along here and you can read each one as it's giving a little bit more detail instead of just they're showing you, they're letting you picture that in your head instead of telling you. And let's kind of review the important narrative elements. We have characters, setting, plot events that happen, time and place transitions. Those are going to be your transition words that you're giving into the next piece of your narrative writing. Character dialogue, descriptive details, and sensory language. Now, these are not, when you guys are writing your narratives that you'll be writing in the next couple of days, I want to see some good character information, some good setting. Don't just say, once upon a time in a castle. Go in there and use that descriptive details and tell me about the setting. Let me picture it in my head, okay? Tell me about that crazy old witch that had 2 moles upon the end of her pointy nose, Okay, tell me some information and give me some descriptive details about that. What do you hear when you're walking along the forest? That would be your sensory language. And then what does the fairy godmother say to the little princess when she sees her? Hi, sweetheart, I'm going to turn you into a little frog. Okay, and using your quotation marks. Okay, and then giving me some plots, not just once upon a time there was a princess, she saw a castle, and then she was gone. Okay, you guys are 4th grade, going into 5th grade very soon. You can tell a story really well verbally, which means you're talking and telling it. Now I want you to be able to do it writing it. Okay, remember guys, happy learning, and to reach out to me if you have any questions about this. We can do a Canvas conference if we need to, or anything like that. Happy learning, guys.